Detective Mason had been working tirelessly for months on the Bonnieville murders. The town had been shaken by the series of brutal killings, and Mason had been tasked with finding the killer. Despite his best efforts, the trail had gone cold, and he was no closer to solving the case than when he had started. One day, Mason received an anonymous tip that led him deep into the woods outside Bonnieville. He followed the winding road, surrounded by tall trees on either side. The sun was setting, casting an eerie orange glow across the forest floor. Mason couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Finally, he arrived at a secluded cabin deep in the woods. Mason approached the door cautiously, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. He knocked, and the door creaked open. The man who answered the door was the last person Mason expected to see. It was John, a man he had interviewed early on in the investigation. John had been cooperative, but there had been no evidence linking him to the crimes. "What are you doing here, John?" Mason asked, his hands still on his gun. "I have information," John replied, his eyes darting around nervously. "Can we talk inside?" Mason followed John into the cabin, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. The cabin was small and sparsely furnished. There was a wood-burning stove in one corner, and a rickety table and chairs in the center of the room. John motioned for Mason to take a seat, but Mason remained standing. He was too on edge to relax. "I know who the killer is," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mason's heart raced as he leaned in closer, eager to hear what John had to say. "It's me," John said, pulling a knife from his pocket. Mason drew his gun, but before he could react, John lunged at him with the knife. Mason dodged to the side, his gun clattering to the floor. The two men circled each other, John with the knife and Mason with nothing but his fists. John was faster, but Mason was stronger. They exchanged blows, their grunts and heavy breathing echoing through the small cabin. Finally, Mason landed a solid punch to John's jaw, sending him reeling back. He lunged for his gun, but John was too quick. He tackled Mason to the ground, the knife glinting in the dim light. Mason fought back, but he was losing strength. John was too strong, too determined. The knife sliced through Mason's chest, and he gasped in pain. Blood spilled from the wound, pooling on the wooden floor. John stood over Mason's body, his chest heaving. He wiped the knife clean on his shirt and tucked it back into his pocket. He glanced around the room, taking in the carnage. He smiled, knowing that he had won. John disappeared into the woods, leaving Mason's body behind. Despite months of searching, the authorities never found him. The people of Bonnieville were left with a sense of unease, knowing that the killer was still out there, lurking in the shadows. The townsfolk lived in fear, never knowing when the killer might strike again. Rumors circulated that John was hiding in a cave deep in the woods, emerging only to claim his next victim. But despite the best efforts of law enforcement, they could never find any trace of him. As time passed, the people of Bonnieville slowly began to forget about the murders. But in their darkest moments, they would remember the horror that had gripped their town, and they would wonder if the killer was still out there, watching, waiting, and plotting his next move.